Glory to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. This video is a continuation on the video about the history of the world and some of what was going on in the church in between the Holy Ecumenical Councils. So this video will cover the history between the 4th and the 5th Holy Ecumenical Councils. Of course, the 4th Ecumenical Council was the Holy Council of Chalcedon, or Chalcedon, in the year 451. And the 5th Holy Ecumenical Council was around the year 553. So roughly 100 years is what this video will cover. And also, it's very important because this particular 100 years in between the 4th Holy Council and the 5th Holy Council, a lot of things actually happened in the world because of so much of what was going on in the church. And this is a pattern that we will see all through history, that a lot of the things that happen in the larger world are influenced by the events within the church. Because by the time we get to around the 5th Ecumenical Council, actually, a lot of the world and a lot of Europe in particular will start to actually look a little bit more familiar, the map. Not like the way it does here, but a little bit more like the way it does even in more modern times. But now, where we left off in the last video on this topic, we were around the time of Attila the Hun. Now, the height of Attila the Hun's power was pretty much in the year 451, actually, the same year as the 4th Ecumenical Council. And Attila the Hun he had been attacking the Eastern Roman Empire, and he had been attacking the Western Roman Empire very heavily. And in the year 451, the same year as the 4th Council, Attila the Hun had even tried to invade Paris of Gaul, within Gaul. But through the prayers of Saint Genevieve of Paris, he was not able to invade Paris. Now, Attila the Hun dies around 453. But now, when he dies, his sons tried to take over and tried to somewhat consolidate the area that he controlled. And remember, the area that the Huns controlled, which was kind of a loosely this area stretching from, well, it's hard to see here, but this line here, because this white here is the Caucasus Mountains. So not really anywhere within the Caucasus Mountains, but the areas above it. In the previous video, I explained how this area to the north of the Caucasus Mountains is actually the Pontic-Caspian steppe, which is part of the larger steppe region, or the plain region, the grassland region that stretches across Central Asia, but is above the Black Sea here, and kind of in between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And then through much of the Balkans, and then all the way through much of the Hun territory I'm talking about, the Hun-controlled territory going through the Balkans and into Central Europe and all the way towards the North Sea at one point, here, into Western Europe. Now remember, the Huns were multi-ethnic, so the Huns were ruling over the people that were also here before that. So primarily the people within this territory are still for the most part the Germanic tribes. Some of the other tribes that were also here, like the Alans, some of them were still here, but primarily it was the Germanic tribes at this point. But remember, a lot of them, the East Germanic tribes, had already moved towards the west, like the Visogoths we see here, and the Suebi and the Vandals, who had already moved into the far western part of Europe. Now, one very important event that happens to Attila, actually, is that when he goes to invade northern Italy, which he does, because he does invade and sack parts of the northern parts of Italy, Pope Saint Leo of Rome, actually meets with Attila the Hun. And we don't know exactly what all of the details of the meeting were, but I remember reading somewhere, I don't remember where it was, that Saint Leo actually was carrying with him an icon, a holy icon of our Lord Jesus Christ. But however, whatever happened with the meeting, actually Attila the Hun was actually never the same after that meeting, and his downfall actually was soon after. So around the year 453, like I said. Now from 453 to around 463, the Huns pretty much collapse. As we see here, as I'm just going to move forward about 10 years, and we see here the Huns pretty much can't hold on to their territory, and they pretty much just collapse. Now the collapse of the Huns is very important because now this will make way now for the next main migration within Europe, which is now the migration of the Slavic peoples further into into the Balkans and into Central Europe. Now remember, even at this point, because we're still a little bit before the Slavic migration. Now the Slavs here, where it says the Slavs, this is pretty much the foresty area of what's now would be pretty much part of Russia, Western Russia, around like the areas in between like Kiev and Moscow today. But this area was at this point where a lot of the Slavic tribes were living. When you went here now within the Balkans, though, above the Danube, you have these Germanic tribes here. The Ostrogoths are another East Germanic tribes similar to the Visigoths, but they had not migrated with the Visigoths. And then we have the Lombards, who are also another Germanic tribe who were from very far north. The Lombards actually originated even as far north as Scandinavia, but they had gradually moved down towards Roman territory. And then this group here, the Gepids, are also a Germanic tribe, and they're pretty much controlling this area where it's green. It's kind of hard to see. Let me see. I put the relief app on the map here. It shows a little bit more of the geography. The Gepids are inside of the Pannonian Basin, or the Carpathian Basin, which is a flat area surrounded by the Carpathian Mountains here. Now the Gepids will soon be kind of ousted from this area, and I'll get to that when I get to that. But just to show kind of what was going on at this point. So we have the Lombards, the Gepids, and the Ostrogoths just hovering outside of the borders of both the Eastern and Western Roman empires. And just very briefly, I just want to discuss a little bit of just the Western Empire itself. Now remember, the Western Empire formed in 395, if we recall, when Emperor Theodosius I, remember Theodosius I, who was the one who called the Second Ecumenical Council. Well, he had divided the Roman Empire into two parts, the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire. The Western Roman Empire, like the East, was part of this, initially ruled by the Theodosian family. So his two sons, remember, controlled each respective side. And they were two separate, administratively, empires. So, of course, you have Theodosius II, who was the one who called the Third Ecumenical Council. And then after that, it passed to Emperor Marcian in the east, Constantinople. In the west, it was under Honorius, who was Theodosius's other son, Theodosius I's other son, Honorius. Now, Honorius was the one who at first had let the Visigoths in, but kind of made a big mistake, because then the Visigoths basically just took advantage and overthrew locally this area and then caused chaos here. So for the most part, remember, the Western Roman Empire is very short-lived. It doesn't survive the 400s, whereas of course the Eastern Roman Empire will continue the legacy of the Orthodox Christian Roman Empire all the way until for another 1,000 years, until 1453, when Constantinople is conquered by the Ottoman Turks. But of course, we're not up to that point. That's 1,000 years away. But the Western Roman Empire, remember, and the Western Roman Empire was, of course, an Orthodox, just like the East. And remember, the Orthodoxy in the West was the same as the East at this point. Some of the emperors in the West that I didn't really mention so much, but one of the daughters of Theodosius I, her name was Galla Placidia. She had married her husband's name was Constantius III, and he becomes the Western emperor only for about 1 year in the year 421. And then we have after that the emperors in the West are not related to the Theodosians. It's just more generals that become um, elected as emperor. So then after that we have Emperor Valentinian III for about 20 years from 425 to 455. So Valentinian III would have been contemporary with Marcion in the East at the time of the Fourth Ecumenical Council. And then after this point, there's until from the 450s to around the 470s, there's a series of emperors, and they're not so important. They're just but there's a series of emperors that is kind of like a revolving door of emperors in the West, while the empire pretty much in the West is failing. So we have Petronius Maximus Avitus, Majorian, Libius Severus, Anthemius, Olybrius, Glyceros, Julius Nepos, and Julius Nepos will be the last emperor recognized at least from the point of view of the East, and then Romulus Augustus, which ends in his reign is in 476, and he's the last. That's when everything pretty much collapses. Now, moving forward, I'm just going to move forward by year here. Let's see, 462, and as we move forward, you will see here that as we move forward, it's pretty much nothing really changes for the next 20 years, around the next 20 years, until we get to around 476. Now, at 476, pretty much everything collapses. The last remnants of the Western Empire completely collapsed, and then we have here the Visigoths fully expand, and then we have the situation with the Franks in the north and Odoacer in Italy and here. Now, Odoacer was a Germanic warrior who became a king, pretty much enthroned himself in this area. But this Odoacer will be replaced very quickly by the Ostrogoths. Let me see. But I'm just gonna move back actually just to around 477, because now a lot of things happen at this point that's very important. Now in the East, after Marcion. Now remember, Marcion would have been the emperor in the time of the Fourth Ecumenical Council. Marcion is the last of the Theodosian dynasty in the East at this point. So in the East, Emperor Leo I becomes the emperor in the East. Now Leo I is also, we recognize him as a saint, Saint Leo, and he was known as being a very pious emperor actually. One very important event that happens during this time is actually the revealing of the belt or the zoni of the All Holy Theotokos in the Holy Land. And Saint Maximus the Confessor relates this story in his the life of the All Holy Theotokos. Now, Emperor Leo I is the beginning of the Leonid dynasty, which lasts for like about a few decades, a good 60 years of this dynasty, the Leonids in the East. Now remember, when the Western Roman Empire had collapsed, all that's left now is the Eastern Roman Empire to carry on, at least on an earthly sense, the Orthodox Christian empire of the Romans. Now Leo I, Emperor Leo I was in power from around 457 to 474, and then after him, somebody comes to power. His name is Zeno, Zeno, Emperor Zeno. Now, Emperor Zeno is a little bit more now. A situation comes in that's not a very good situation because of what was happening now with the Monophysites within the Eastern Roman Empire. Now, this is where now the repercussions of the Fourth Ecumenical Council are now coming into play in terms of the Monophysites, because of course the Monophysites had been expanding or becoming popular still within parts of the Alexandrian, well, in Egypt and in parts of Syria for the most part. Actually, the Monophysite heresy had started to disappear around the area of Constantinople, probably because of also the miracle of Hagia Euphemia, Saint Euphemia, which was very well known and actually witnessed to by so many people, at least in the area around Constantinople and Chalcedon, that most of the people within the Eastern Roman Empire of the Greek-speaking areas of like let's say closer to Greece, let's say in Constantinople, tended to um, go against the Monophysite heresy. But when it comes to Egypt, though, unfortunately, because remember Dioscoros was the patriarch at the time who was deposed in 451. But and but the Monophysites had supported him, and he had a large following, and that's what started the Monophysites fighting to keep control of the Alexandrian Patriarchate at this point. So at this point in Alexandria, there's a lot of infighting going on between the Orthodox and the Monophysites. And the same is now happening in Antioch. Now in Antioch, this is very important because in Antioch, around the time when Emperor Zeno comes to power as the emperor in Constantinople, um, a, a heretical patriarch comes in, and his name is Peter the Fuller, or Peter Phulo. I think in Greek his name is Petros or Kanafis or Kanafeos. A fuller being like a type of like a launderer, like somebody who washes garments, which is like which was his previous occupation before he was a clergy. But so that's why he's called Peter the Fuller. But he comes to power as, well, I'm sorry, comes to power. He becomes the patriarch, but he's heretical. And as soon as he comes in as the patriarch of Antioch, he starts blaspheming the Fourth Ecumenical Council because he was a monophysite. And but unfortunately, he has at times the support of Emperor Zeno. Now, this period from starting in the 470s especially, and up until the Fifth Ecumenical Council, there's something that happens which is part of the reason why the Fifth Ecumenical Council is convened, actually. And it's starting here. And it's this idea of theological compromise, which becomes very common, unfortunately, during this period. And compromise with the Monophysites. And of course, we understand as Orthodox Christians that any kind of compromise with heresy is unacceptable. But many of those in power, like the emperor and many within the clergy at this time, among the Orthodox even, were willing to compromise orthodoxy to try to appeal to the Monophysites, which was a very big problem. Now, during this period, in the time of Emperor Zeno, there was a heretical text that was published, and it was called the Henotokon. And the Henotokon was pretty much a bridge to the Monophysites, where it kind of tried to redefine the Orthodox understanding theologically between the Orthodoxy and the Monophysite heresy. And this caused a very, very big problem because now in the 480s, the Bishop of Rome at that time actually breaks communion with Constantinople over that particular heresy, the Henotikon. That schism will actually persist until the early 500s, around the year 519. So from about 486 to the year 519, Rome and Constantinople will actually not be in communion with each other. Now, remember is that the fault was with Constantinople's side, let's say, because it was the patriarch and the emperor who, colluding with each other, actually created the Henotikon in order to try to rein in the Monophysites. So the bishops of Rome at the time were actually preserving orthodoxy. Now, the reason why it's called the Acacian Schism is because the Patriarch of Constantinople, his name was Patriarch Acacius, and it was Felix III, who was the bishop of Rome at the time, who was actually the one who was really orthodox in all of this, ironically, because it was actually the actions of the bishops of Rome at the time that actually helped to preserve orthodoxy, not only in the West, but also in the East. Because remember, at that time it was understood that 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 the Monophysite heresy, if it was allowed to spread, would end up really ushering in the apocalypse. I mean, it sounds like a strange thing to say, but it's true, because remember, if heresy is allowed to spread and threaten the faithful, and also threaten the fact that remember that people are coming into the church for salvation. Without the Orthodox Church, that there is no hope for the rest of the world. So these kinds of heresies, like the Monophysites, at this point especially, it's very dangerous situation. And but remember the bishops at this time, though, and remember there were so many holy bishops in both the East and the West at this time, and a lot of holy confessors against the Monophysite heresy in all of these places, and not to mention even like Saint Simon the Stylite, or Saint Simon of Stylites, who was in Upper Mesopotamia at this time, on his pillar actually during this time, and he was well, maybe slightly before this, but he was very much confessed against the Monophysite heresy. So they were also great ascetics. Many saints in all these places that were confessing against the Monophysite heresy, but unfortunately it was taking its toll, though, on a lot of the empire, because a lot of the crucial areas, like the Patriarchate of Antioch and the Patriarchate of Alexandria, and at least locally within Jerusalem, among a lot of the Christians in the Holy Land, there was a lot of division that was happening. And also remember, the Bishop of Rome did this. Did this. This is in the 480s. Well, actually, I'll just move up to that point when we have this. When the schism begins, at the same time that, remember, in the West, including the Bishop of Rome, but all through the West, and for the Orthodox Christians, remember, the Visigoths were not Orthodox. They were actually still of the Arian heresy. And the same is true with Odoaker, who they were Arians, and the Ostrogoths. When the Ostrogoths will soon take over this area, they were Arians. So the Orthodox Christians were actually living under a lot of tribulation, because remember, the population in these areas, the older Roman era population, were Orthodox Christians. It's just that the conquerors pretty much were Arians, including the Vandals. Now, unfortunately, now in the time of that Peter the Fuller, he had tried to introduce a change to the Trisagion, which was something that was only implemented pretty much among the Monophysites. And then in later times, when even to this day, the Monophysites still do this practice, but it's actually he altered the Trisagion. Actually, he tried to alter it, or he did, as I said, for the Monophysites. And what he did was he actually put in a clause where at the end of reciting the Trisagion, the people say, "And he who was crucified for us," which is actually blasphemy, because it brings in another heresy called the Theopaschite heresy, meaning that because we understand as Orthodox Christians that it's our Lord Jesus Christ who was crucified, the Son of God, not the Father and not the Holy Spirit. I mean, to suggest that the Father was crucified and to suggest that the Holy Spirit was crucified, that's heresy. It's blasphemy. So, which is what that clause does. Um, uh, so it's one of the things that he was known for. And it's an issue that will be addressed in the Fifth Ecumenical Council, that particular clause, as well as this Henotokon, this heretical text that was promulgated by Acacius of Constantinople and Emperor Zeno of Constantinople. So that turmoil is happening at this point. Now, as we get into the 490s, I'm just going to move ahead 10 years. Now remember, the schism is now going strong between Rome and Constantinople at this point. We have something very important that actually happens, and that's the conversion of the Franks to Orthodoxy. Now, the Franks had been living outside of the borders of Rome and Gaul before the Western Empire had collapsed. And the Franks originally were a confederation of the West Germanic tribes that had become into one group called the Franks, and they had established their own kingdom. Originally, it was under their tribal chieftain, whose name was Merovec, and then they formed a dynasty that's sometimes referred to as the Merovingians. Now, this is where it's very, very important to separate fact from very blasphemous fiction that unfortunately is in most people's minds, which is very delusional. Now remember, this is still way before Charlemagne and way before the Franks that we think of as being Papist Franks, and way before even the pre-Papist Franks. This is still the 400s we're talking about. And remember, through the 400s and the 500s and the 600s, the Franks, when they become Orthodox, the same orthodoxy as the East. There is no papism. This is way before any of the filioque in the creed. This is way before. Remember that we're not talking about the papists. The clergy, the holy icons, the praxis, the orthopraxis among the Franks is pretty much the same as you would see in the East. So when the Franks become Christians and become Orthodox, that's a very big triumph of orthodoxy, because remember, the Visogoths and the Ostrogoths were not Orthodox, and the Vandals, they were Arians still. Because remember, Arianism was still existing with these groups. Even up to this point, while we have the Monophysites in the East. Now, the story of the conversion of the Franks is very important. Now, it's connected somewhat with the Burgundians. Now, the Burgundians actually were an East Germanic tribe. The reason that they're here in the West is because they had been forcefully pushed into the West by the Huns. But before that, they were living in the Balkans. Now, the Burgundians were related ethnically to the Vandals. Now, the Burgundians were, unlike the Vandals, the Burgundians were partially Orthodox and partially were still Arians. And this division extended up into the rulers of the Burgundians. So the rulers of the Burgundians, the ruling family, some of them were Arians and some of them were Orthodox. Now this comes to the story of Saint Clotilda of the Burgundians. Saint Clotilda was the daughter of now Clotilda's father. His name was Chilperic. Now she was Orthodox, and her father was Orthodox, but they also had an uncle who was the brother of her father. His name was Gondobad, and he was Arian. And what happens is that her uncle actually martyred her father and some of her other relatives who were Orthodox. So she was the only one left in her family. But she ended up marrying Clovis, who was the king of the Franks. And then she helps bring Clovis and the Frankish kingdom to orthodoxy. So it was actually a very great miracle. And Saint Clotilda is known for being a very pious, holy saint. Now, the conversion of Clovis to orthodoxy is very important. And the saints write about this during this period, because remember, in this area, of course, there's no more Gaul. When this area was still under the Western Roman Empire, there was a very great Orthodox monasticism and an Orthodox tradition in Gaul, like the saints of the Jura Mountains. The monasteries of the Jura Mountains on the foot of the Alps was pretty much like the Athos of the West. So there was a lot of very holy saints at the time. So the Franks kind of inherit the Orthodoxy as it was, because remember, the same bishops, a lot of the same people, the population, the Roman population of Gaul kind of become merged with that of the Franks, where the Franks, remember, are Germanic, and they spoke the Frankish language, which is a Germanic language, but gradually, at least locally, a lot of the Franks will start to speak also the dialect of Latin that was spoken in this area. And that dialect eventually will become the early dialects of French. But the Franks at this point are still pretty much though a Germanic people at this point. And they end up also assimilating some of these other groups like the Saxons and the Alemanni and the Burgundians eventually. Well, certainly because when Clotilda marries Clovis, the house of the Burgundians and the house of the Franks merge. Now, unfortunately, in a lot of like the quasi, I would say, Masonic blasphemous histories that were written in modern times, this dynasty of Clovis, the Merovingians, sometimes gets this weird, bad name. It's kind of like also where they also in modern times will blaspheme and slander Saint Constantine. Also, the Merovingian dynasty is also very much many times, but the Merovingians, remember, were Orthodox, and there were a lot of saints among the Merovingian house at this time. And sometimes, unfortunately, they're confused with like a much later medieval papist kind of imagery, which absolutely was not true. That didn't even exist at this point. So so we have now the conversion of the Franks also, and the story of Saint Clotilda. Now, back in the Eastern Roman Empire, of course, Emperor Zeno, he had initially come to power in around 474, 475. Then he's actually was overthrown, and there was another emperor named Vasiliscos, who was only there for like about a year. And then Zeno had come back for the next 20 years, until around the year, all the way until the year 491. And then we have the emperor. Zeno was there a long time. Emperor Zeno, after he comes back again, and then after Emperor Zeno, we have Emperor Anastasios, who is there until around from 491 to 518. So Zeno and Anastasios were the emperors in the east during pretty much the time of the Acacian Schism, while Rome and Constantinople are not in communion with each other. We have this break in communion. And remember, in Alexandria and in Antioch, we have this turmoil between monophysite and Orthodox bishops that were wrestling control over those two patriarchates. So now I'm just going to move forward to around. Now we see here the Ostrogoths have taken over Italy. So now the Ostrogoths will be the primary oppressors of the Orthodox within Italy and parts of the Balkans during this period. So as we move forward now to around the year of 5, I'll stop it right here at around 518. Well, 518, 519. Now 519, we have Rome and Constantinople come back into communion with each other in the year 519, which was a very big triumph of Orthodoxy. And that's also because in 518, that was when Emperor remember, Anastasios was a supporter of the Monophysites and a supporter of the Henotokon. And then after that, in 519, we have Emperor Justin Justin I comes to power. Now, that's Justin I is now the beginning of the Justinian Dynasty. And now Justin's successor is Justinian the Great, Justinianus, who's very, very, very important in the history of, of the church history during this time. So as the decades go by, from the late 400s now into the 500s, there's sort of this status quo that develops between the Visigoth kingdom, the Ostrogoth kingdom, and the Eastern Roman Empire. And the Franks are a little bit far away at this point. But remember, these Franks at this point are Orthodox. So this is very important. And of course, in Britannia, or former Britannia, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms who are pagan have taken over, pretty much taken over much of what was Britannia. Now I'm going to move forward another 10 years to around the year 527. Now this is important because this is around the year that Emperor Justinian comes to power in the Eastern Roman Empire. Now, Emperor Justinian is very, very important because Emperor Justinian, first of all, he's the one who convenes the Fifth Ecumenical Council in the 550s. But also, Emperor Justinian is able to reconquer much of Italy and much of North Africa and parts of Hispania from the Ostrogoths and the Vandals and the Visigoths, respectively. Now, I also suggest reading the dialogues of Saint Gregory the Dialogist. Now, Saint Gregory the Dialogist, he's not at this point. He's a little bit later at the end of this century in the 500s, but he will be the Bishop of Rome, and he's considered, of course, among the Church Fathers. But Saint Gregory the Dialogist has a lot of very important writings. One of his writings, and the reason he's called the Dialogist, is because he wrote 4 books called the Dialogues. And it's in the form of like a question and answer between Peter the deacon and himself, St. Gregory, who answers a lot of very important questions. But also the discussion is primarily about, locally, the saints of Italy and the saints and the Holy Fathers, especially a lot of the ascetical fathers of Italy, a lot of the Italian saints. So if anybody wants to read about the history of the Italian Orthodox history, and a lot of Italian saints and fathers, I recommend Saint Gregory the Dialogist. But Saint Gregory, because he's just after this period that we're discussing here, when the Orthodox were living alongside the Ostrogoths, who were Arians at this point. But remember, not all of the Ostrogoths would have been Arians. A lot of them would have been gradually coming to Orthodoxy because of the witnessing of the faith by the Orthodox locally, even just regular lay people, but also, of course, the clergy at the time. And the same is true for the Visigoths. There were individual Visigoth people that had been converting to Orthodoxy at this time. And during this period, actually in the 500s, the conversions actually start to increase. And there's a lot of very interesting stories of churches, like church buildings, that had been converted from being under Arian use to Orthodox use. And some of the miracles that happened, and interesting phenomena that also happen, I guess, when you have like the demons being forced out of a lot of these places because of the heresy. And St. Gregory the Dialogist goes into detail about this particular subject. So now we're in the beginning of the reign of Emperor Justinian. Now, in the beginning of the time of Emperor Justinian, there was a Emperor Justinian, or Saint Justinian, I should say, was at war with the Sassanid Empire, the Persians. Then there was a peace treaty that was actually conducted in the year around the year 532 AD. Now, the year 532 is now very important because now we have this peace treaty with the Sassanids. But also, this is around the time that the Anno Domini system of the AD system gets put into place. And also some of the important implementations of the within the Orthodox calendar, uh, the Paschal moon, such as the Paschal moon cycle, and the fact that it's remember it's mathematical, the mathematical aspect, which now becomes the the the, uh, the understanding of the Orthodox calendar, but is implemented very much at this time, as well as the AD, the Anno Domini system, in the time of Saint Dionysius Exiguus, during this time in 532 AD. And also now, in Constantinople, there was a very big event that happened called the Nika riots. The Nika riots was actually a riot that happened in Constantinople, um, because of the hippodrome. Now, the hippodrome, or the horse racing, was still a practice that was done at this time. And remember, Constantinople actually had a very large hippodrome. The outline of it can still be seen to this day in modern times. Um, uh, Emperor Theodosius had even brought in from Egypt a large obelisk, an Egyptian obelisk. Because remember, now, this is where I think there's an important discussion of, remember, there were certain aspects on a local level of some of the culture that even though everybody was Orthodox Christian at this point, now some of the more extreme things were put to an end by the emperors, like obviously things like the Olympic Games, certain other pagan games, but certain other things were actually still kept in the public sphere, in the secular sphere, which was probably not a good thing. But remember, nothing is perfect. Remember, the people were not perfect at this time, and certainly the Orthodox Roman Empire was not perfect. And remember, there were still people that were themselves still pagan at this time, and there were people. Not everybody within the empire literally was Orthodox Christian necessarily, but but one of these things that still was kept in as a public tradition was the hippodrome. And the hippodrome had even followings of their teams, like the Reds and the Blues. And sometimes some of the issues, even when it came to like the Monophysite heresy, would kind of spill over into the teams. And apparently there was something not unlike like soccer or football hooliganism. There was sometimes disturbances among the teens, especially among the youth of the time, and it actually caused this huge riot. This one event and actually was a riot that ended up spilling over to being a riot against Emperor Justinian, actually. And it caused a huge fire through Constantinople, and the original Hagia Sophia was even um, burned and destroyed during this time. So Emperor Justinian had to put down this riot that was caused within the hippodrome. And but during this time, in the year 532, is when the foundation for the new Hagia Sophia, the current structure that is there to this day, was actually the foundation was consecrated in the year 532 AD. Another very important event during this time. Now, after 532, in 533, and for the next 10 years, there's a very, um, an enormous war. It's actually one of the biggest wars in all of history, and certainly one of the biggest wars of late antiquity during this time. And this is the War of Reconquest of the Western regions. So Emperor Justinian is able to reconquer during this period. I'll try to go year by year if it shows it here. So this is 533, 534, 535. Let me see. I'll go to around, here, we have it here. We're moving up. See, so we have here Emperor Justinian able to take territory. The Vandals were conquered at this time. Actually, I'll try to move a little bit more. Let me see. Well, here we have here the conquest of the Vandals. Now, this is very important because when the Vandals were conquered, it actually liberated the Orthodox Christians from being under Vandal rule. But also the Vandals, when they had, and 100 years before this, invaded and sacked Italy and Rome, the Vandals, remember, because the Vandals had sacked Rome, the Vandals had taken a lot of treasures from Rome that was in Rome for a very, very long time. One of the interesting things that were actually taken by the Vandals actually is some of the relics actually of the Temple of Jerusalem, from the Second Temple. That some of those things actually, like the lampstand of the temple, and some of the other things, originally when the Romans in 70 AD had destroyed Jerusalem and taken a lot of those things back to Rome, they were actually placed in a pagan temple. There was a pagan temple at an earlier point called the Temple of Peace, and that's where like the lampstand of the temple was, and it stood there for centuries and centuries actually on public display in that pagan temple until the middle of the 400s when Rome was sacked by the Vandals, and the Vandals had sacked and taken a lot of those things to North Africa. And then, now at this point, Emperor Justinian actually sees a lot of these things that are still there at this point, actually, which is quite ironic because actually, I just if I briefly mention this, that at least when it comes to the lampstand of the temple, Emperor Justinian, Saint Justinian, actually returns it to Jerusalem. And there was a church in Jerusalem that besides the Church of the Holy Resurrection, or the Church of the Sepulchre, was actually one of the main churches within Jerusalem. It was called the Nea Ecclesia. And it was actually not far from the Temple Mount area. Because remember, in the area of the Temple Mount, like where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is today, on the base of the Temple Mount, in Jerusalem, there was also a church there that was dedicated to the All-Holy Theotokos. And then there was also the Nea Ecclesia Church, which actually had many relics from the Old Testament. And one of those things that were brought there was actually the lampstands of the Second Temple, which, remember, was understood as a relic of veneration for the Christians at the time. And the reason why those things don't exist in later times is because of the war that will happen in the when the Sassanids in the 600s will invade Jerusalem. I'll get to that war when we get to it because it's in the next century. But the Jews actually, with the collusion of the Sassanids, actually invade and take over parts of Jerusalem and actually destroy the Nea Ecclesia Church and actually destroy a lot of those relics, actually. So a lot of the relics actually from the Second Temple, which had been returned to Jerusalem, are actually destroyed by both the Persians and the Jews, ironically. But anyway, that's just a little bit of a tangent there. But I just wanted to mention that because it was one of the things that I should say relics that Saint Justinian had liberated from the control of the Vandals. Now, during this period, as we get up to the Fifth Ecumenical Council, now we're approaching the Fifth Ecumenical Council. Saint Emperor Justinian had also was fighting on two fronts, because the Sassanids there was now war with the Sassanids and the continuing war with the Ostrogoths to basically to be able to hold on to Italy. Now, I forgot to mention that one of the greatest generals at this time in history is General Belisarius, who's a great military mind, actually, who was the one who actually executed a lot of this war, actually, because this war was a very not an easy war to wage, actually, against the both the Vandals and the Ostrogoths. And now the king of the Ostrogoths at the time his name was Totila. Now Totila is actually mentioned, like I said, by Saint Gregory the Dialogist, with some of the in some of the some of the stories that take place during quote unquote the time of Totila, when Saint Gregory the Dialogist kind of goes back to this particular time period. But still, remember, the Ostrogoths are still Arians. Totila was an Arian, part of the Arian heresy at this time. And same thing with the Visigoths. The Vandals themselves gradually disappear as a people and are just assimilated into the larger population, their descendants eventually just becoming Orthodox. So that's pretty much it. I didn't want it to be too overwhelming with all of the history, but that's pretty much it. Now we're up to the point of the Fifth Ecumenical Council. So here's the world the way it is. We have the Eastern Roman Empire now much larger. The Eastern Roman Empire now ruling over parts of the West. So now, when the Eastern Roman Empire controls this area, it is very important because now for the first time again, all 5 patriarchates are now under the Eastern Roman Empire. So all 5 patriarchates, Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem, come under the Eastern Roman Empire. And of course, we have the Franks who are Orthodox. And then gradually, at the end of the 500s, after this, well, we're not up to that, will be in the next video, we have the conversion of the Anglo-Saxons to Orthodoxy. And then we have over here something very important that happens, because now remember, during this period, gradually, it doesn't really show it very well on this map, but it's been happening actually. The Slavs have been coming down into the Balkans. So the Slavic people now will soon replace the Germanic people in this area. But there's going to be another group now, following, let's say, in the footsteps of the Huns, that will come across Asia, remember, through the Pontic-Caspian steppe, through the area, like let's say, of the fighting going on now, like the Donbass area, and that is the Avars. The Avars are this people here, the Ruran. Now, the Ruran themselves will collapse the same year, pretty much, as the, well, actually, let me see if it shows it here. Oh, here it is. At the same time as the Fifth Ecumenical Council. This is one of those events where the councils, the ecumenical councils, the church councils, influence a lot of what goes on in the larger world. Now, the Avars, very quickly, you can see how quickly this happens. And this happens because, let me just move 1 year before, in 532. Remember, the Ruran, this is very important because the Ruran are actually a Khaganate. They're the first to use the title Khan or Kagan. So they're a Khaganate. And ethnically, remember, they're a mixture of the early Turco-Mongolic people. Now, when they move across, it's because this Ruran are overthrown by the Turkic peoples, the Turks, who are related to them. But there's some kind of a overthrow, but the Turks and the Avars, this people, were rivals of each other. Ethnically, they were very, very similar, but the Turks actually have a visceral hatred for the Ruran. So when they overthrow them, now we see the beginning of the Gokturks. This is the earliest state of the Turkic peoples that we see, the Gokturks. Remember, this is the ancestors of the Turkic tribes that we will see later in history, even the Ottoman Turks. This is their ancestors living all the way in Asia at this time near China, mostly being a problem for China at this time. But the Gokturks overthrew the Ruran, and the Ruran become the Avars, and the Avars go across now Central Asia, and then now will be the ones to invade Europe, and the Avars will now be the ones to take control of a lot of Eastern Europe at the same time as the Slavs. Now the Avars will pretty much recruit a lot of the Slavic peoples. So when we see the Avars take over much of the Balkans and parts of Central Europe, they're not doing it on their own. They're actually recruiting the Slavs. Now, the Slavs, of course, are the Slavic peoples, pagan at this time. But the Avars are basically like a Turco-Mongolic in their ethnicity, but the people among them in terms of numbers are going to be heavily the Slavs. The Avars are very important because around this time, a little bit after this, when the Avars are attacking Constantinople, this is the time when the Acacian hymn is written. And if anybody has ever seen any kind of introduction or historical preface in the Acacian, if anyone has the Acacian, even if it's in Greek or in English, that history will actually discuss the Avars, because it was during the invasion of the Avars that the Acacian hymn to the All Holy Theotokos was composed in Constantinople during this time. So here we have it. This is the year of the Fifth Ecumenical Council. This new thing has happened, the Avars, and the establishment now of the Gok Turks, which is now the first Turkic Khaganate. Now this Khaganate will be the predecessor for all of the later Turkic states that will appear all through history. But I'm going to stop this video here with the year of the Fifth Ecumenical Council. That's all for now. Glory to God. Doxa tho Theo.